Hoofbeats rose out of the November dark, like a promise the land had no intention of keeping. 3 horses, moving steady up the frozen road, toward the only light for miles. Winter had already taken the high country. Frost locked the creek. The fences stood white and brittle. Ironwood Ranch waited below, small against the mountains. One lamp burning in the kitchen window like it still believed the night could be kept out. At the gate, a woman stood alone. The coat hung too big across her shoulders. Her hands gripped the cold chain. No rifle, no lantern, just her body between the riders and the house, where an old man waited with a gun in the dark. The lead rider reined in. His voice came calm, almost friendly. "Step aside, miss." Behind him, a hand moved slowly toward a rifle stock. From the barn shadows, a low growl answered. She did not move. The night waited with her. The road into Ironwood Ranch was not a welcoming road. It did not pretend to be. It was rutted clay and sharp rock, cutting north through the foot of the San Juan San Range, like something that had given up trying to be gentle a long time ago. The aspens on either side had already gone gold. October was 3 weeks away, and the high country knew it first. The air had that particular edge, not cold yet, just the warning of cold. The kind of morning that says, whatever you have not yet prepared for, you had better start now. Nora Briggs had been walking since, before sunrise, she had been walking, if she was honest with herself, since she was 16 years old. 3 years of roads that looked like this one. 3 years of doors that opened and then closed again before she finished the sentence. 3 years of learning that the world had a very clear picture of what a woman should look like if she wanted to be taken seriously, and that she did not fit that picture, and that the world was not planning to redraw it on her account. She was 19. She was not small. She had not been small since she was 10 years old, and she had spent approximately 6 months being ashamed of that, before she realized that shame was expensive and she could not afford it. So she had put the shame down somewhere along a road in Kansas and left it there and kept walking. That was the thing about Nora Briggs. She kept walking. Her boots were resoled with pieces of harness leather she'd traded a day's fence work for in Cheyenne. Her coat was a man's coat, too big in the shoulders and not big enough in the body, held together at one side with a length of copper wire she'd wound through the buttonholes herself. She carried a canvas bag that held 3 things: a change of shirt, a folding knife with a bone handle, and a small notebook with a stub of pencil, where she had been writing down, for 3 years, everything she had ever learned about cattle. She had learned a great deal. No one had wanted to pay for it yet, but she was getting closer. She could feel it the way you feel weather before the clouds arrive. Something about this road. Something about the smell of this particular piece of Colorado, creek water and pine sap, and beneath it the specific honest smell of cattle and worked earth, that made her walk a little straighter. Or maybe she was just tired enough that straight was easier than bent, hard to say. She had heard about the Holts in Denver. Not much, just enough. An old woman at the rooming house, where Nora had spent 4 nights before the money ran out. A small, sharp woman named Addie, with the permanent expression of someone who had been proven right about everything, and was mentioned them in passing. A ranch in the high country, near Ridgeway. Good land, good cattle. The kind of operation that had been built right and was being run into the ground by time and the shortage of hands, not by bad management or bad luck. The old man is too proud to ask for help, Addie had said, and the woman is too careful to trust strangers. Nora had said, "How far is it?" Addie had looked at her for a moment, long enough to take in the coat. The boots, the size of her, too far to walk, Addie had said, which was the kind of answer that told you exactly nothing useful. Nora had asked again. Got a number. Started walking, that was 6 days ago. In those 6 days, she had been refused a ride by 2 freight wagons, and one family in a buckboard who had looked at her and then looked at the space on the seat and then said, "There wasn't room. There was room. She could see there was room. But you learn. over time that some conversations are not actually about what they are about, and you save your energy for the ones that are. She had slept twice in barns, once with permission and once without. She had eaten what she carried and rationed it correctly, and arrived at the bottom of this particular road with exactly enough energy left to make the walk up it, and not significantly more. Which was fine. She had done more with less. The ranch came into view from the top of the rise. Nora stopped not because she needed to rest. Because she needed to look. She had learned, from the old man in Kansas, from 3 years of watching ranches from roads and fence lines and the outside of barn doors, that the first look at a place tells you almost everything. If you've spent enough years being wrong about people, you start being right about land, not the house. Not whether the paint is fresh or the curtains are clean. Those things tell you about pride or money, and she didn't need to know about either. She looked at the fence lines, south pasture, down in 2 places. Maybe 3. Hard to tell from here, but there was a section near the tree line where the cattle had been pushing against it. You could see it in the way the posts leaned. Not broken yet, but leaning. And leaning is just broken with a delay. She looked at the water trough near the near barn. Even from this distance, she could see the dark stain spreading from the base of the north side. A crack, probably at the joint where the stone met the wooden frame. Losing water. Depending on how long it had been cracking, probably losing half of what was being put in. She looked at the barn roof. 2 patches on the west side. One of them recent. The wood was still pale. One of them older and starting to lift at the corner. One more winter, and that corner would be a problem. She stood on the rise for another minute. 30 head of cattle in the far pasture. Good animals, well kept, fat enough going into autumn, which meant whoever was managing the herd knew what they were doing. The problem was not knowledge. The problem was bodies. The problem was that running 400 acres of mountain grass and creek bottom required more than 2 people. And 2 people, she could see from here, from the way the place had the look of something being maintained by will, instead of capacity, was what was left. Nora picked up her bag, started down the road. Winifred Holt was at the kitchen window when the girl appeared on the rise. She was not a girl who looked like she had wandered off course. She did not have the dazed, desperate look of someone lost. She had the slow, deliberate walk of someone who had thought carefully about where they were going and was now going there. She was large. That was the first thing Winifred noticed. Not because it was the most important thing. Winifred had lived 61 years and learned to be suspicious of first things, but because it was the most visible thing. The girl was broad-shouldered and heavy, and she walked the way large people sometimes walk when they have stopped apologizing for the space they take up. Not aggressive, just settled. Like a river that has found its banks and is not confused about them. Winifred watched her stop at the top of the rise, watched her look at the water trough, watched her look at the barn roof, not at the house, not at the curtains, not at any of the things a person looks at when they are looking for charity. At the fence, at the trough, at the roof, Edmund, Winifred said. From the table behind her, a chair shifted. The sound of a man who has been sitting with numbers he doesn't like and is not sorry for the interruption. Someone coming up the road, Ryder. Walker. The chair scraped back. Edmund Holt came to stand beside his wife, and together they watched the girl reach the gate. She took off her hat. Both of them blinked at that. It was such an old-fashioned gesture that it landed strangely, like hearing a song you'd forgotten you knew. She held the hat in both hands and looked at the house with the same careful, assessing attention she'd given the fence line. Then she walked to the door and knocked. Winifred opened it, up close. The girl was younger than the road had made her look. 19, maybe just. Brown hair pulled back under the hat she was still holding in both hands. Her face was broad and tan, and there was a faded bruise along her left jawline 3 or 4 days old. Her coat was a man's coat. Her boots had been resoled more than once. Her eyes were the kind of gray that is almost green depending on the light, and they were steady in the specific way that eyes go steady when their owner has learned that the first few seconds of a conversation are the ones that decide everything, ma'am. She said, "I'm sorry to come without notice. My name is Nora Briggs. I've been on the road from Denver." She paused. Then she said, quickly and without preamble, like a woman who has learned that preamble gets her nowhere, "Your water trough is cracking at the north joint. You're losing probably half of what you're putting in. Your south fence is down in 2 places, and there's a third section near the tree line that's being pushed from this side. Probably a younger bull testing it, or something moving along the tree line at night. And your barn roof has a corner on the west side that won't make it through February." Winifred stared at her. From behind Winifred, Edmund's footsteps crossed the floor. Nora looked at him when he appeared. Adjusted slightly, the way a person adjusts when the center of authority shifts in a room. But she did not look away, did not soften, did not add anything apologetic to her expression. "Let me stay," she said. "I'll fix all of it. The fence, the trough, the roof. I know cattle. I know water systems and fence work, and I know how to read a herd's mood before it becomes a problem." In exchange, she stopped, then said it plainly. "Meals and a place to sleep. That's all." Edmund looked at her the way he looked at everything. Slowly, without hurry. The way a man looks when he has been burned by quick judgments enough times to have stopped making them. "Where are you from?" he said, "Kansas originally." "I've been working ranches since I was 14. Working or drifting?" A pause. She gave him the honest answer. Some of both. Edmund's eyes moved across her. The coat. The boots. The bruise. The hat she was still holding in both hands, with the particular grip of someone holding on to the one thing that is still polite. "You can see all that from the road?" he said. "The fence. The trough. Roof, I know what to look for. And what does your south fence look like from the road? Down in 2 places. Third section leaning. Posts on the near side have been pushed. From inside, not outside. So it's your animals, not something coming in. Probably a young bull. Probably the same one who's been restless all summer, if I had to guess." Edmund looked at Winifred. Winifred looked at Edmund. 31 years of marriage had made this its own language. A conversation conducted entirely in a glance. She saw him processing it. She saw the familiar shape of refusal beginning to form. They'd had drifters before. One had stolen a saddle. One had disappeared with $40 from the kitchen drawer. One had worked 3 good days, and then drunk himself into uselessness. The word no was forming on Edmund's lips. It was almost there. And then it happened. The sound came from the south, not a complaint, not the low, shuffling unease of a restless herd. This was something else entirely. This was cattle in genuine distress, the sharp, carrying ball of animals that are frightened and moving, pushed by something or panicked by something, heading somewhere they were not supposed to go. Nora turned before either of them spoke. She was already moving before Edmund could say a word. Not running. She did not run. But she moved with a focused, ground-eating walk that covered distance faster than it looked like it should. Cutting left around the corner of the house without hesitation, heading not toward the sound but at an angle to it, calculating. Edmund and Winifred came to the porch. From the rise behind the barn, they could see the south pasture. The gate was still closed, but the fence, the section near the tree line, the leaning section Nora had spotted from the road, had given way. The posts were down, and through the gap, 31 head of cattle were moving into the open ground, between the pasture and the tree line, picking up speed with the mindless momentum of a herd that has found an opening and is not yet sure what to do with it, but is committed to doing something. 10 minutes. Maybe less. After that, the trees would swallow them. Edmund was already moving toward the corral, and then he stopped because Nora Briggs was already in the field. She had not gone toward the cattle. She had gone around them. Wide left, looping out through the far edge of the property, where the ground rose slightly, before dropping into the flat stretch near the trees. She was moving fast, not running. Her body wasn't built for running over rough ground, and she seemed to have known that from the beginning. But moving with the economy of someone who has thought 3 steps ahead and is executing on a plan she made in the time it took Edmund to reach the corral. She got to the flat stretch before the cattle did. She stopped, planted her feet wide, spread her arms, not waving, not shouting, not making herself loud and frightening the herd further into panic, just standing, just being there. Being large and still and undeniable in the specific place where the open ground narrowed before the tree line, a wall that hadn't been there before. A fact that the cattle had to reckon with. The lead animal slowed. You could see it from the porch, the ripple of hesitation moving back through the herd like a wave traveling in reverse. The ones at the front checking, pulling up. The ones at the back running into the ones at the front and bunching, confused. The momentum of their panic interrupted by this unexpected obstacle. Nora did not move. She stood in the gap between the open ground and the trees. And she was still, and she was quiet, and she was simply there. The lead cow, a big red roan who was clearly the one who'd found the gap in the fence and led the others through, turned her head. Looked at Nora. Looked at the trees. Looked at Nora again, made a decision, turned back. And the herd followed, the way herds do when the lead animal decides. All that momentum, all that panicked energy, redirecting. 31 cattle turning in the field like a slow bovine tide. Edmund counted. He counted again, 31, every single one. That was when Scout appeared. The border collie came out from behind the barn at a dead run. All business, the way he always moved when there was work to be done. He was 5 years old, and he had been the best working dog Edmund had ever owned, which made what happened next all the more surprising. Scout ran toward Nora, not toward the cattle, not toward Edmund, toward Nora. He reached her at a dead sprint and then stopped, right in front of her, and stood there, chest heaving, looking up at her. Then he turned and moved to her left side, the working side, the flank side, and sat down with the focused intensity of a dog who has found what he was looking for. Edmund's hand tightened on the fence rail. Winifred, standing behind him, made a small sound. Not quite a word. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. Scout had not sat beside a stranger since the winter of 1874. Since Thomas Edmund knew, rationally, that a dog was just a dog. That Scout's trust was a matter of instinct and smell, and the particular body language of someone who knew how to move around cattle. It was not a verdict. It was not a sign. And yet, he watched Nora Briggs bring his 31 cattle back across the south field, Scout running the left flank with the focused dignity of a dog who has finally been given work worth doing. And he did not say anything. He did not have words for what was happening in his chest. He wasn't sure he would have used them, even if he did. Nora came back over the rise, with the cattle moving in a calm, compact group ahead of her. She brought them into the north pasture. The gate was already open. She'd spotted that the chain was loose when she'd passed the corral, filed it away, and closed the latch behind her. Then she walked back to where Edmund and Winifred were standing, stood in front of them, not breathing hard, not performing ease. Just standing. 2 sections of the south fence are down, she said. You'll want to check the 3rd section, I mentioned. I couldn't get to it, but the posts are leaning toward the interior. I'd want to walk the whole south perimeter tomorrow morning before moving them back. Edmund said nothing. The lead cow is the roan, Nora continued. She found the gap. She'll find the next one too, if there is one. You might want to think about separating her for a few days while you do the repairs. Give the fence work time to set before she tests it again. Still nothing from Edmund. Nora stopped. Looked at him directly. She did not ask if he was all right. She did not apologize for the unsolicited advice. She did not soften any of it. She just waited. Edmund looked at his cattle in the north pasture. Looked at the south field where the fence posts were still down in the fading afternoon light. Looked at Scout. sitting beside Nora's left boot with the serene certainty of a dog who has made up his mind, looked at Winifred. Winifred was looking at the cattle. Edmund cleared his throat. "There's a room at the back of the barn," he said. "Straw tick mattress. There's a wash basin on the nail by the door." He paused. "It's not much. It's more than I had last night." Nora said. "Supper's at 6, Winifred said, without turning around. "We don't wait." "Yes, ma'am." Winifred walked back toward the house. Edmund stood for another moment. Then he handed Nora the gate chain. "That latch needs a new pin," he said. "There's hardware in the left bay of the barn. Should be what you need." He walked away before she could respond, which was fine. Nora looked at the chain, looked at the barn, looked at the south pasture, where the fence still needed fixing, and the sky was turning the particular orange of a mountain evening that doesn't wait for you to be ready. She put the chain over her shoulder and went to find the hardware. The room at the back of the barn was exactly what Edmund had said it was, which was to say, not much, a straw tick mattress on a wooden frame. A wool blanket that had been washed so many times it had gone thin in the middle. A wash basin on a nail by the door and a cracked mirror above it. One window, east-facing, which meant she'd get the morning light and miss the evening wind. A hook on the inside of the door. A knothole in the south wall at exactly eye height if she was sitting on the mattress, which gave her a view of a section of fence and a piece of sky. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she set her bag down on the wooden floor, sat on the edge of the mattress, and took off her boots. Her feet hurt. They had been hurting since day 3 of the walk. She'd stopped noticing sometime around day 4, because noticing wasn't doing anything useful. Now she noticed. She sat with her feet on the cool floor for a few minutes. Outside, the ranch was settling into evening. The sounds of it, cattle moving in the north pasture, a horse shifting in the stall 2 doors down, the distant knock of something being put away for the night, were exactly sounds that she had fallen asleep to, for most of her life. The running started. The sounds of a place that was being taken care of. Of a place that needed taking care of. She reached into her bag and took out the notebook. The stub of pencil. She wrote the date at the top of a new page. September 1879. Colorado. Ironwood Ranch. Below it she wrote, fence. Trough. Roof. Roan cow. Scout. She looked at that last word for a moment. The dog, that had been something she hadn't planned for. She had planned for the people, the skepticism, the weighing up, Brosjona. The questions about whether she could do the work. She had not planned for the dog to come sprinting across the yard and sit down beside her, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Animals were different from people. She had always known that. Animals responded to what was actually there, not to what they thought should be there. They didn't have any investment in what you were supposed to look like. They just felt the particular stillness she'd learned to carry when she was near a frightened herd, the specific kind of calm that says, nothing bad is happening right now. We are here. We are fine. And either that feeling meant something or it didn't. Apparently it meant something to Scout. She closed the notebook, put it back in the bag, pulled the bag under the mattress frame where it was out of sight. Through the knothole in the south wall, she could see a strip of sky going dark blue above the fence line. The first star. Then, too, she had a roof, she had a mattress, she had work that needed doing, and a place to do it. That was, she thought, the most she had had in 3 years. She lay back on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, and was asleep in 4 minutes. Supper was at 6. She was there at 5:53. Winifred Holt's kitchen was the kind of kitchen that tells you who a woman is before she says a word. Clean without being sterile. Practical without being cold. There were dried herbs hanging from the ceiling beam. Not decorative. Working herbs, the kind you actually cook with. There was a cast-iron skillet on the back of the stove that had been seasoned so many times it was nearly black. There was a small window above the sink that looked out toward the south pasture, and on the sill was a single blue glass bottle that caught the last of the evening light and turned it into something worth looking at. The table was set for 3. Nora noticed that and did not comment on it. Edmund was already at the table. He had washed and changed his shirt, but he still had the particular posture of a man who has been outside all day and whose body remembers it. He looked up when Nora came in, looked at her for a moment, then looked back at his hands. Winifred set a dish on the table. Beef stew. Dense and fragrant and clearly made with the confidence of someone who has been making this exact stew for decades and has no interest in changing it because it works, and working things do not need to be changed. They sat. For a while they ate. This was, Nora had learned, actually the kindest way to begin. Not conversation, not questions, just food. Just the shared fact of hunger and something to satisfy it. In that silence, there was a kind of provisional acceptance. You are here, you are fed. Let's see what else is true. The gate pin, Winifred said. After a while, Fixed Dext said, I used a heavier gauge than what was there. It'll hold better. Winifred nodded. The roan, Edmund said. Not a question. A test. She's 3, maybe 4. She's been the lead for about a year, I'd guess. The others watch her before they make a move. She's smart. Smarter than most cows like to be. You'll want to watch her next spring when the herd is restless. Edmund said nothing. Then, she pushed through that fence before. 2 years ago. We put her in the east pen for a week and she seemed to forget about it. She didn't forget, Nora said. She just filed it away. A pause. Yes, Edmund said. I expect so. Winifred refilled Nora's bowl without asking. Nora noticed that too. She ate the second bowl and did not make it small or apologetic or anything other than what it was, which was food that she needed, and that was here. You said you've been working ranches since you were 14, Winifred said. Since 14. Before that, my father's place. Kansas. He ran a small herd, 40 head at the most. I helped him from the time I could manage a gate. Your father's not there anymore. A pause. Then. No, ma'am. Winifred did not push it. Nora was coming to understand. Of knowing when a silence was a door and when it was a wall and leaving the walls alone. Edmund set down his fork. Who taught you to read a herd the way you do? Nora thought about the old man in Kansas. Amos Brierly, 60 years old, and alone, and completely indifferent to what anyone thought about anything, which had made him the most restful person she had ever spent time with. A neighbor, she said, after my father. He ran cattle alone on 60 acres. He needed an extra pair of hands, and he didn't care what the hands looked like. She said it plainly, not bitterly. Not looking for a reaction, Edmund looked at her, didn't look away, didn't fill the silence with reassurance, which she would have found condescending. You ate enough? She had. She said so. Breakfast is at 5:30, he said. I don't wait for that either. He pushed back from the table and left the room. Nora sat for a moment. Winifred began clearing the dishes. Then she stopped. Set down the bowl she was holding. He's not unfriendly, she said. He's. She paused, looking for the word. Careful. I know the difference, Nora said. Winifred looked at her. A long look. The kind of look that takes a person apart and puts them back together very quickly and comes to a conclusion. Yes, she said. I expect you do. She was up before 4, not because anyone asked her to be. Because. The fence needed walking, and she wanted to get the full south perimeter done before breakfast. And there was only so much daylight, and she had learned long ago that borrowed light was not something you wasted. She dressed in the dark, gathered her tools. The pliers and wire from the hardware bay, the fence staples she'd found in a coffee tin on the 3rd shelf. She'd noted their location yesterday when she went to fix the gate pin. You always note where things are. You always look for the tools before you need them. That was Amos Brierly's first rule, and it was the one she'd carried the longest. Scout was waiting outside the barn door. She had not heard him coming. He was just there, sitting on the cold ground in the pre-dawn dark, patient, looking at her with the expectant focus of a dog who has already decided that the day's work is going to be good and is ready to begin. She stood with him for a moment in the dark. All right, she said. He stood up. Waited for her to choose a direction. She pointed south. He went. They walked the fence line as the sky went from black to deep blue to the pale gray that comes just before the light breaks over the eastern peaks. She found the 2 downed sections and marked them with stakes. Found the third, the leaning section, and saw that 3 of the 5 posts had been pushed significantly further than she'd estimated from the road. Not a young bull testing the fence. Something had spooked the herd from the other side, she thought. Something moving along the tree line at night. She pulled the posts and reset them, tamping the ground solid with the heel of her boot, working methodically from north to south. Twice she stopped and just listened to the tree line. Nothing moved, but something had moved recently. She could tell from the way the cattle, even in the north pasture, tracked the eastern edge of the property with their attention. Cattle don't look at nothing. Cattle look at what they heard last. She filed that away. By the time the sky turned fully light, she had walked the entire south perimeter, reset 4 posts, restrung 2 sections, checked the east side as far as the creek bend. She stood at the corner post, the one that marked the southeast corner of the property, where the fence turned and the creek came down from the high Ken country, and looked back across the 400 acres of Ironwood Ranch in the morning light. Good land. You could see it clearly from here, why someone had chosen to build here. The creek bottom grass was thick and dark, the kind that stays green well into September. The slope of the mountain behind the barn blocked the worst of the north wind. The south pasture caught the afternoon light until it was nearly dark. Good, careful land, the kind that rewards the people who pay attention to it. She turned and walked back toward the barn. Edmund was coming out of the house when she reached the yard. He stopped, looked at her, looked at the tools in her hands, looked at the pasture beyond her, said nothing. South perimeter is walked, she said. 4 posts reset, 2 sections restrung. The east side is solid to the creek. I found where something has been moving along the south tree line at night. The cattle are tracking it. You might want to check for tracks once the frost comes up. A pause. I'll want to look at the water trough after breakfast, she continued. The joint crack is deeper than I thought from the road. I'd like to repack it with stone and mortar rather than patch it, if you have the materials. Edmund looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "We have stone from the creek bed. I'll show you where the mortar mix is kept," and he walked past her toward the barn. Not unfriendly. Winifred had said, careful. Nora understood careful. She had been careful herself for 3 years. Had learned to read the difference between a person who was weighing you and a person who had already decided. Edmund Holt was still weighing. She could work with that. She went in for breakfast. In the weeks that followed, Nora Briggs proved useful in the particular way that certain people are useful, not because they make a performance of it, not because they need you to watch, but because they see what needs doing and they do it, and the only evidence of their effort is the thing that was broken and is now fixed, the thing that was leaking and is now dry, the thing that was leaning and is now straight. She rebuilt the water trough, joint with creek stone and mortar. She mixed herself, doing it in sections, so the work could set properly between days. She did not rush it. Rushing mortar is how you end up doing it again in 6 months. And she had no interest in doing anything twice when once would last. She walked the barn roof on a Tuesday in early October when the temperature had dropped to 32 degrees by mid-morning. She was up there for 2 full days, replacing the lifting corners section and resetting the older patch beside it. From the ground, Edmund watched her move across the roof with the careful, planted sureness of someone who is fully aware of the consequences of a misstep and has arranged their body accordingly. He did not offer help. She did not ask for it. That was something. With the cattle, she had what the old ranchers called the gift of stillness. The ability to move through a herd without the herd knowing you'd moved through them. To read the mood of 30 animals not by looking directly at the thing, but by reading everything around it. The way they held their heads, the way they moved off their water, The way the roan cow stood at the south fence line in the evenings and faced the tree line and was quiet. She mentioned the roan to Edmund one morning at breakfast. "She's facing east every evening," she said. "Not south, east. That's new." Edmund's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. "Since when?" "4 days. She stands at the southeast corner post for about 20 minutes before she comes back to the herd. The others watch her when she does it, but they don't follow. Something in the trees. Something in the trees." Edmund set down his cup, went to get his coat. They found the tracks that afternoon. Bear. A young one, by the size of the prince. Probably a second-year male who hadn't established territory and was ranging wide. He'd been coming down along the tree line at night, close enough to smell the herd, but not close enough to cause a stampede, just close enough to make them nervous. Edmund set snares along the tree line, not to catch the bear. A snare wouldn't hold a bear, and they both knew it. But to give warning. To know when it came back. He did not say anything to Nora about it. But that evening at supper, he refilled her coffee cup without being asked for Edmund Holt. That was something close to a speech. At 6 o'clock every evening, Nora sat at the table with Edmund and Winifred and ate supper and was not late once. She was quiet at the table. Not sullen quiet. The quiet of someone who listens more than she speaks and is comfortable with that arrangement. She asked questions about the land, where the water ran in spring, which pastures went thin in dry years, which sections of fence had been rebuilt and which had been original to the place. The questions of someone building a map inside their head, learning it slowly. By what it said when it didn't mean to, Edmund answered. A little more each evening. Not warming exactly. Warming was too fast a word for Edmund Holt. Thawing, perhaps. The slow, gradual process of a thing that has been cold for a long time discovering that the temperature has changed. Winifred watched this, said nothing. Thought things she kept to herself. Because there was something about Nora Briggs that Winifred could not yet settle. Not a wrongness. She had a sense for wrongness sharpened by 61 years, and it was not going off. The girl was honest. She worked without being watched. She never went into the house uninvited. She asked before she changed anything. It was something else. It was the way she never talked about where she had come from. Not evasively. Not with the sharp deflections of a person hiding something criminal. More the way a person doesn't speak of a wound that is still too fresh to press on. Kansas originally. Working ranches since I was 14. 5 years of silence between those two sentences. 5 years that had turned a Kansas girl into someone, walking alone through the Colorado mountains, with re-soled boots and a fading bruise on her jaw. Winifred did not push the door. The door would open when it was ready. She set an extra biscuit on Nora's plate without comment. Nora ate it without comment. Outside. Scout ran his evening perimeter check around the north pasture with the self-important dignity of a dog who takes his responsibilities very seriously. The bear snares along the tree line were quiet. The water trough was full and holding. The south fence was straight. October settled over Ironwood Ranch with the particular quality of high country autumn. Cold mornings and gold afternoons, and the slow, steady feeling of a world preparing itself for what was coming, getting its affairs in order, making sure everything was where it needed to be before the snow arrived. Nora Briggs sat at the table in the kitchen of the Holt house and ate her supper and watched the light go out of the window above the sink and did not think about Denver or Cheyenne or the rooming house or the freight wagons that hadn't stopped. She just sat. She had a roof. She had meals. She had 31 cattle and 400 acres and a fence line she'd walked twice now, and knew like a road she'd traveled herself. Scout at her left boot every morning. She had work. Good work, the kind that stays fixed when you do it right. For the first time in a long time, Nora Briggs did not think about the road. The road could wait. There was work to do first. November came to Ironwood Ranch, the way it always came to the high country, without asking. One morning the frost was just frost, the thin, Decorative kind that melts by 9 and leaves the grass sparkling like something that wants to be admired. The next morning it was something else entirely. The kind of cold that has intent behind it, that settles into the ground and the wood and the stone of a place and says, I am here now. Arrange yourselves accordingly. Nora arranged herself accordingly. She had been doing that her whole life. She added a second pair of socks inside the Rees-old boots. She found a length of wool in the barn, a horse blanket that had been retired from horse use and was living its second life, folded on a shelf. And she fashioned it into something that went over her shoulders under the man's coat. Not elegant, functional. Which was the only category that mattered when the temperature dropped below 20 before sunrise. She was up before 4 every morning, 2 fixed points in the day. Breakfast at 5:30. Supper at 6. Everything in between was work, and the work was never finished, and she had made her peace with that a long time ago. A ranch is not a thing you complete, it is a thing you maintain. You maintain it against the weather and the time and the slow entropy of everything that wants to fall apart. If you take your hands off it for long enough. Nora understood maintenance. She had been maintaining herself against entropy for 3 years. Same principle. Edmund watched her. Not, obviously. Not in the way that would have made her uncomfortable or changed how she moved through the work. He watched the way a man watches when he is trying to understand something and has not yet decided what he understands. He saw how she moved through the herd. That was the thing he kept coming back to. He had known good cattlemen, had known a few extraordinary ones, men who could read a herd the way a doctor reads a patient, who knew before any visible sign appeared that something was off, that one animal was pulling away from the group in her mind before she pulled away with her body. His father had been like that. Thomas had been like that. Nora Briggs was like that. She moved through the cattle without the cattle, knowing she had moved through them. She did not creep. She did not tiptoe. She just had a quality of presence that was not threatening. That said, on some frequency the animals understood and humans mostly didn't. I am here. I see you. Nothing bad is happening. He watched her work the herd one morning in early November, moving the cattle from the north pasture to the east field, where the late grass was still good. She did it alone, no horse. Just her and Scout, operating with the wordless coordination of 2 creatures, who had somehow, in 2 months, developed the kind of working shorthand that usually takes years. Scout took the left flank. Always the left. Nora took the right. Always the right. And the middle, the uncertain, shifting, occasionally chaotic middle, where cattle make their worst decisions, somehow sorted itself out between them. Edmund stood at the gate and counted them through, 30 on every time. 31. He closed the gate, turned back toward the barn, said nothing, but that evening at supper he passed the bread to Nora before Winifred asked him to, which, for Edmund Holt, was practically a declaration of something. Douglas Reeve came on a Tuesday in early November morning. Pale sky. The kind of cold that makes sound carry farther than should. So you hear a horse on the road before you see it. Nora was on the barn roof. She had found another section on the east slope that needed attention. Not urgent, but the kind of not urgent that becomes urgent. The first time 4 inches of snow sit on it. And she was up there with the hammer and a bag of cut shingles when she heard the horse. Horses, plural, 3 of them. She did not stop working, but she looked one man in front on a good bay. Not the horse of someone who works, the horse of someone who pays others to work. Good coat. Full beard going gray at the edges. The hands on the reins were soft. Not the hands of a rancher, the hands of a man who signs papers rather than posts fences. Behind him, 2 riders, younger, quieter in the particular way of men who are being paid to be present rather than to speak. Nora watched them come through the gate. Kept her face neutral, kept her hands moving, nailing, measuring, nailing again. The man in front looked up at the barn roof, looked at Nora. Something moved across his face, too quick to name, but she named it anyway. She had been naming that look her whole life. She was good at it now. Edmund came out of the house. The man dismounted, extended his hand with the practiced warmth of someone who has extended that hand many times and knows exactly how much pressure to use. Edmund. Good to see you, Reeve. Edmund did not take a step forward. He shook the hand because not shaking it would have been a thing, and he did not want to make things yet. You've come a long way. Not so far, Reeve smiled. The smile of a man who is always exactly as far as he needs to be, just checking in on a neighbor. Nora kept nailing. Reeve looked up again. You've taken on help, he said, to Edmund. About Nora. As if Nora were a fence post. As if she were a piece of equipment whose presence was noted and categorized and filed. We have, Edmund said. That's good. Reeve's voice was smooth, reasonable. The voice of a man saying something that sounds like one thing and means another. Good that you recognized you needed it. A place this size, 2 people, your age. He let the sentence trail off the way people do when they want the implication to do the work for them. It's a lot to manage. Nora drove a nail. Clean, hard, straight. He wasn't asking for her opinion. He was talking around her like she was furniture, which was different, and which she had decided a long time ago to treat as information rather than injury. Reeve was still talking. I've been thinking about our previous conversations, he said to Edmund. I want you to know I understand your position. This land is yours. You built it. That means something. He paused for effect. But I also want you to think about the winter ahead, about what it costs to run a place this size when the cold comes down, about what it costs when what? Edmund said. His voice was flat, not angry. Flat, in the way that is sometimes harder to argue with than anger, when circumstances change. Reeve said carefully. A silence from the barn roof. Nora had stopped nailing, not visibly. From the ground you couldn't have told, but she had stopped. She was listening, cataloging, the way she cataloged fence posts and water joints in the direction a cow was facing at dusk. Filing it away. My circumstances haven't changed, Edmund said. No, Reeve agreed, pleasantly. Not yet, he remounted. The 2 silent riders shifted. Reeve gathered his reins and then looked up at the barn roof one more time, with the particular look of a man making a calculation. Good work, he said to the roof. Not quite to Nora. Not to her. Then he rode out. Edmund was at the fence rail when Nora climbed down. He was looking at the road where the dust from Reeve's horses was still settling. He had his hands in his coat pockets, and his jaw set in the way it went, when he was holding something in that he hadn't decided yet whether to let out. How many times? Nora asked. Edmund looked at her. How many times has he come? A pause. 3rd time this year, Edmund said. The 2nd visit he brought company, 2 men. Guns worn low. Nora looked at the road. He's escalating, she said. He always does. Then we need to be ready for it. Edmund turned to look at her fully. That slow, thorough look. The one she had come to understand meant he was not dismissing what she'd said. He was taking it seriously enough to take his time with it. We, he said, not a question, not a challenge. Just the word, sitting there between them, waiting to see what she did with it. Nora held his gaze. I fixed your fence, she said. I rebuilt your trough. I am on your barn roof in November. I think we settled the question of we 2 months ago. A pause so long she could hear Scout moving in the east field. Then Edmund made a sound. Low. From somewhere in the chest, it was not quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when something surprises him that he didn't think could still surprise him. He turned and walked back toward the house. Supper at 6, he said. Without turning around, I know, Nora said. You don't wait. That evening the supper table was quieter than usual, which was saying something. It was always fairly quiet. Winifred had made cornbread, and the last of the autumn squash roasted with the dried sage from the ceiling beam, and the kitchen smelled like everything good about November if you had a roof and a fire, and didn't think too hard about what was outside. Nora ate, waited. Edmund ate, said nothing. Winifred looked at her husband, then at Nora, then at her husband again. The private language of 31 years. Then she said, He was here before. When Thomas was still alive, Nora looked up. Reeve. He came then too. Made an offer. Winifred's voice was even. Factual. The voice of a woman who has processed her feelings about something and arrived at the other side of them. Edmund said no. Reeve left. Came back the next year, and the next, Edmund said. His voice was quiet. Not bitter. Just tired in the specific way of a man who has been fighting the same thing for too long. He's patient. That's how he operates. He waits for the moment when the other person's patience runs out first. He thinks you're close to that, Nora said. Edmund looked at her. He does, he said. Are you? A long silence. Edmund looked at the table, at his hands on either side of the plate. The hands of a man who had built this place with those hands, who had put every post and beam and stone of it in the ground himself, who had fed 30 head through 30 winters with those hands. I'm 63 years old, he said. I have 400 acres and 30 head, and I cannot work it the way it needs working. I know that. Reeve knows that, he paused. That's what gives a man like that his power. He waits for you to get tired. The fire moved in the grate. Then don't get tired, Nora said. Edmund looked at her. She said it again, not differently. The same words, the same tone. Not a pep talk, not encouragement in the hollow, filling a silence way of someone who doesn't know what else to say, just a fact. The way she said everything, don't get tired. Get a plan, Edmund was quiet. Winifred set down her fork. Looked at Nora with the long, careful look that Nora had come to understand was Winifred's version of speaking. What kind of plan? Winifred said. After supper. When Edmund had gone to check the snares along the tree line, and Winifred was clearing the plates, Nora stayed at the table. She was looking at the window. The dark square of it, the reflection of the fire on the glass. Winifred set the last dish aside, came back to the table, sat down, didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you've been thinking about something. Since Reeve left, not a question. I've been thinking about a lot of things, Nora said. The same things you always think about? Nora looked at her. What do you mean? Winifred folded her hands on the table. I mean the things you think about when you're quiet, which is different from just being quiet. I've been watching you for 2 months, Nora. I know the difference now. She paused. You get a particular look. When you're somewhere else in your head. Nora looked at the window again. Kansas, she said, finally, tell me. And the strange thing, the thing Nora could not have predicted and would not have been able to explain, was that she did. She did not tell it the way she had planned to tell it, on the rare occasions when she had imagined telling it at all. She told it the way things come out when the fire is low, and the house is quiet, and the person across from you is not going to react in the ways you have spent years guarding against. Not with pity, not with the particular wincing sympathy that makes you feel like a wound being examined. Just listening. Her father's name was Robert Briggs. He had come to Kansas from Ohio in 1855 with $30 and a second-hand plow and the absolute conviction that the land would reward a man who worked it properly. And it had, for a while, enough to build a house, enough to build a small herd, enough to raise a daughter. He died in the spring of 1874, heart, sudden. He was in the south field, and then he was on the ground, and by the time the neighbor found him, he had been there for 3 hours. In the April sun, Nora was 14. Her mother remarried within the year. Not out of cruelty, Nora had thought about it enough, over enough roads, to arrive at something close to understanding. Out of necessity. Out of the reality of a woman alone in 1874, with a daughter and a piece of land she didn't know how to run. The man she married was not cruel either. He was just very clear, in the way that people are clear without saying the actual words. But say them in every other way, there wasn't room. Not for Nora specifically, for what Nora was, the size of her, the way she took up space in a house and a life, and every room she entered, the way she ate, the way she moved, the way she existed, full and unashamed, in a world that kept trying to make her smaller. I left when I was 16, Nora said. I told myself I was choosing to go. By that point, the distinction didn't matter much. The fire crackled. And the bruise? Winifred said. The one that had been on her jaw when she arrived. Long faded now. But Winifred had noticed. Of course she had. Nora was quiet for a moment. A man in Cheyenne, she said. He managed a freighting operation. He offered me work. When I didn't understand what kind of work he meant, he explained it differently. She paused. I explained differently back. His explanation left a mark on my face. Mine left a mark on his ability to walk correctly for about a week. Winifred made a sound. Short. Involuntary. I didn't start it, Nora said. And I finished it as fast as I could. I should think so, Winifred said, with a firmness that suggested she would have done exactly the same thing and expected nothing less. A pause. I've been on the road since, Nora said, working where I can. Trying to. She stopped. Then. I don't know exactly what I've been trying to do. I just know the work is the only thing that makes sense. When I'm doing the work, I know what I am, what I'm worth. I don't have to prove it to anyone, because the fence is straight, or the water is running, or the cattle are where they're supposed to be. She looked at her hands on the table. But you can't prove it if no one will let you start. Winifred was quiet. Then she said, Edmund doesn't look at you and see what you've been afraid he sees. Nora looked up. He looks at you and sees someone who noticed things on the south fence that he'd been looking at for a month and hadn't quite let himself understand. Winifred paused, and he sees Thomas. I don't say that to make you carry something that's not yours. I say it because you deserve to know why he is the way he is with you. Why he's, she chose the word carefully. Afraid of it. Of what? Of allowing himself to rely on someone again. She looked at the table. We lost him in the winter of '74, Thomas. He was 19. A fever, the kind that comes fast and goes faster, and doesn't leave you time to argue with it. She straightened the cloth napkin in front of her. Edmund didn't speak for 3 days afterward. Just worked. Just kept working. Nora said nothing. He asked the same questions you ask, Winifred said, about where the water runs in spring, which pastures go sparse in dry years. He was building a map inside his head. The same one you're building. The fire was low. I didn't know that, Nora said. Winifred stood. Began stacking the cups. You couldn't have. She carried the cups to the basin. Stood at the window above the sink. For a moment. The one that looked toward the south pasture. The one with the blue glass bottle, catching nothing in the dark. You've been trying to find something worth stopping for, she said. Not quite to Nora. To the window, to the dark outside it. Most people are. There's no shame in it taking a while. Nora sat with that. The fire crackled once. Then settled. Scout scratched at the back door. Once. Patient. His signal that Edmund was coming back from the tree line, and everyone should know about it. Nora stood. Put on her coat. Thank you, she said. Winifred did not turn around. 5:30, she said. He doesn't. I know, Nora said. He doesn't wait. She went out into the dark. Reeve came back on a Friday night, 3 weeks after the daylight visit. Late enough, in November, that the first real cold had arrived. The creek was starting to skin over at the edges in the mornings. The cattle spent more time at the hay and less time at the grass, which meant the hay was going faster than anticipated, which meant a trip to Ridgeway before December, which was one more thing on a list that kept growing. Edmund knew it was Reeve before he heard the horses. He had a sense for it now. A kind of anticipatory tightening in the chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the exhaustion of having already had this conversation and not wanting to have it again. He went for the rifle. Edmund, Winifred's hand on his arm. Winifred, wait, she looked at him. The look. 31 years of that look. And he had never once found a good argument against it. He waited. Winifred went to the barn. Nora was already awake. She had heard the horses too, earlier than Edmund had. Farther up the road, she'd been tracking the sound for the last 4 minutes, with the specific attention she gave to things that were moving. Toward the ranch from outside it. She was standing at the barn door when Winifred arrived, her coat on, her hands at her sides. Scout pressed against her left leg with every muscle in his body, vibrating at a frequency that wasn't quite sound. His eyes were fixed on the gate. His tail was very still. "You know those men?" Nora said. "The one in front has been trying to take this ranch for a year." Nora looked at the gate, 3 horses. Reeve in front on the bay, the same 2 riders behind him. Something was different tonight. Something in the way they had come, later, darker, the hour of a visit that does not intend to be a conversation. "Is Edmund going to do something that makes this worse?" Nora said. Winifred almost smiled. "Almost." "He's considering it." Nora was quiet for one moment. Then she walked out of the barn. She walked to the gate without hurrying, without reaching for anything, without changing her pace or her posture from the walk she used to cross the yard at 5:30 in the morning to start the day's work. Just walked, as if this were any other thing that needed doing and she was going to do it. She stopped at the gate, looked up at Reeve on the bay horse. The cold air carried her breath in small clouds. The lamp from the house threw a thin rectangle of yellow across the yard, stopping just short of where she stood. "Help you?" she said. Reeve looked at her. In the daylight, 3 weeks ago, he had looked at her from the saddle with that particular expression. The categorizing look. The look that files you before it knows you. In the dark, right now, something was different, because Nora Briggs was not a small person, and standing. At the gate in the dark with the mountains behind her and no apology anywhere in her body, she was not a person that any reasonable calculation made you want to go through. "I'm here to speak with Edmund Holt," Reeve said. "Mr. Holt isn't available." She kept her voice level. Easy. The way she kept her voice easy when she was moving through a spooked herd. "I manage operations here. You can speak with me." A beat. Reeve's eyes moved to the house, the lamp in the window, the shape visible behind it. "And who are you?" "Nora Briggs. I've been running this ranch since September." She let that sit then. "If you have business with Ironwood Ranch, you have business with me." The 2 men behind Reeve shifted in their saddles. A small sound. Leather. Metal. Nora did not move. "I have an offer for Holt," Reeve said. His voice had shifted slightly, still smooth, but with something under the smooth now, a fair one. "The land isn't producing what it should. He's an old man. This winter's going to be hard." He paused, leaned forward slightly. "I'm trying to help him understand what's in his best interest." "Mr. Holt's best interest," Nora said, "is for you to take your offer back to Pueblo." Reeve looked at her for a long moment. "Son," he stopped himself. "Adjusted, miss. I think you're misunderstanding your position here, and I think," Nora said, "that you're misunderstanding mine." The 2 riders looked at each other, because she was 19 years old and large, and standing at a gate in the dark, with no visible weapon. And she was not afraid. Not performing calm, not talking herself into steadiness. She was steady the way the creek-bottom stone was steady, not because nothing had ever pressed on it, but because it had been pressed on long enough to know what it was made of. The riders felt the difference. Men like that always feel the difference. "There are 3 of you," Nora said. "There's one of me at this gate." She paused. "But there is a man in that house, with a rifle who has been waiting for an excuse to use it for a year. And if anything happens to me," she looked directly at Reeve, "you'll have given him one." Silence. The cold. The dark. The distant sound of 31 cattle shifting in the north pasture. Aware in the way animals are always aware that something is happening, somewhere, that matters. "Do you want this land enough to bleed for it tonight?" she said. Reeve looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the house, at the lamp in the window, at the shape behind it that was not moving. "This conversation isn't finished," he said. "No," Nora said. "I expect not." A pause. "Come back in daylight. I'll make coffee." Something moved across Reeve's expression, not anger. Something closer to the recalibration of a man who has built his entire method around waiting for the other side to be too tired to hold on. Meeting someone who is demonstrably, visibly, infuriatingly not tired. He turned his horse. The 2 riders followed. And then the dark took them. The sound of hoofbeats going south on the road, and then fading, and then silence. Nora stood at the gate until the sound was completely gone. Then she turned around. Edmund Holt was standing on the porch, rifle in the crook of his arm, his breath in the cold air. And on his face, an expression that Winifred, watching from the doorway, had not seen in a long time. The way he had looked at Thomas once. The way you look at someone who has just done something you did not know they had in them, and you are, quietly, privately, in the part of you that doesn't make speeches, proud. Edmund said nothing. He stood on the porch and watched Nora walk back across the yard in the dark. Scout walked beside her. No fanfare. Just where he belonged. Sometimes the most important things go without saying. Sometimes that is the only way they can be said at all. Inside, Edmund set the rifle against the wall. He went to the shelf at the back of the kitchen. The high shelf, the one behind the flour tin and the box of dried apple rings. He brought down a bottle, not the cooking whiskey. Anyone could see at a glance it was not the cooking whiskey. This bottle was darker glass and older, and had a handwritten label that had blurred at the edges from years of being occasionally handled and put back. The bottle that came out only for things that warranted it. He set it on the table. Got 2 glasses. Filled them both. Pleeled one across the table to the chair where Nora had just sat down. Nora looked at the glass. Looked at Edmund. He did not explain it. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down and picked up his own glass and waited. She picked up hers. They drank. The fire in the grate was the only light. Winifred had gone somewhere quieter, her bedroom, or just away, with the particular tact of a woman who knows when 2 people need to be left to find words without an audience. Edmund turned his glass in his hands. "You stood your ground," he said. "They would have come back worse if I'd shown them any give." "I know." A silence. "I've been trying to show them no give for a year." He looked at the table. "But a year wears you down." His voice was flat. Not defeated, just honest in the way that people are honest late at night when the performing is too expensive to maintain. "I'm 63 years old. I have 400 acres and 30 head, and I cannot work it the way it needs working. I knew that going into this winter. Reeve knew it too. He waits for you to get tired," Nora said. "He does. He'll come back. He will. Then we need a plan." Edmund looked at her. "We," he said again. And this time it was different. This time the word was not a question he was waiting to have answered. This time it was something he was trying on, the shape of it, the weight of it. Whether it fit, Nora held his gaze. "I lost my father's land," Edmund said, quietly, as if it had come out ahead of the thing he'd intended to say. "We built this from nothing, Winnie and I. From a piece of paper and 2 pairs of hands and the absolute refusal to accept that it couldn't be done." He paused. "And I have spent every day since Thomas died." He stopped, cleared his throat, looked at the wall behind her. "I have spent every day since Thomas died, knowing that one day I won't be able to hold it. That Reeve or someone like him will come, and I will be too old or too tired or too alone to stop them." The fire crackled. "That's not going to happen," Nora said. Edmund looked at her. "I know I don't get to decide that for you," she said. "I know it's your land and your life, and you have every right to tell me it's none of my business." She looked at her hands on the table. "But I have been on the road for 3 years because I lost a place, my father's place. And I watched it go, and I couldn't stop it, and I have thought about that every single day since." She looked up. "I don't want to watch someone else lose theirs." The fire settled low and steady. Outside, the wind moved down off the mountain and pushed at the kitchen window and went on. Edmund turned his glass, then he said, "My son is dead, I know," Nora said. "I'm sorry. He would have been 24 this February." He turned the glass again. He knew this land the way you know it. The water. The pasture. Which pastures go sparse in dry years. He looked at her steadily. His eyes were wet. He did not look away from them. Did not try to make them something else. "You've been asking the same questions he used to ask." A silence. "I didn't know that," Nora said. "No." He finished his whiskey. Set the glass down. "You couldn't have. He poured another, sat with it. Outside, Scout moved along the porch, his evening perimeter, his last circuit of the day. The rounds he did without being asked, because he had decided this was his place and his people, and the watch was his to keep. Edmund said, "I have a lawyer in Durango." Nora waited. "I've been thinking about something. Since the water trough. Since you rebuilt it properly instead of patching it." He looked at her. "I want to make you an offer." She did not move. "Work this land through the winter. In the spring, if it's still working, if you still want to stay, I'll draw up a partnership agreement, 30% of the operation. Not wages. Ownership," he said the word the way you say a word that means something real. "In 10 years, when I can't work it anymore, you'd have first right to buy the rest." At a fair price. The room was very quiet. Nora looked at the table. "Why?" she said. Edmund said, "Because you're good. Because you stood at that gate tonight, and you weren't afraid, and you didn't do anything foolish." He paused. "And because this land deserves someone who will love it." He looked at her. "And I think you might." Nora looked up. Her eyes were wet. She did not look away. Did not try to make herself smaller, drier, less present in the moment than she actually was. She just let it be there. "The way an honest person lets a true thing be true. I'll earn it," she said. "I know you will," Edmund said. "That's why I'm asking." The fire breathed. Scout came in from the porch and settled by the stove. The night was in order, he had checked. Winifred appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the table, the bottle, the 2 glasses, the expression on her husband's face that she had not seen in a long time. She walked to the cabinet, got a 3rd glass, came back to the table, set it down, poured, sat. Edmund looked at her. "You forgot again," she said. "I always forget. You've always forgotten. For 30 years. And yet you keep sitting down anyway. Someone has to." She lifted her glass, looked at Nora, and said nothing more, because nothing was needed. Nora looked at them both. For the first time since she had walked up a road in September, with Rees-old boots and a canvas bag, and exactly enough energy to make it to the door. She smiled. It was small and genuine, and it changed her whole face in the way that real smiles do, the ones that come from somewhere you'd forgotten you had. Outside, the November wind came down off the San Juan Range and moved through the dark, over the fence lines she had walked, and the water trough she had rebuilt, and the barn roof she had set right for another winter. And Ironwood Ranch, under that particular dark sky, in that particular November, was still there. The fence was straight. The water was running. The cattle were 31 and accounted for. That was enough. For tonight, that was exactly enough. December arrived without apology, which was how December always arrived in the high country. No gradual softening into it, no gentle transition. Just one morning, the world was cold, and the next morning it was something else, entirely. Something with teeth. Something that got into the gaps in the wood and the joints in the stone, and reminded you very clearly that it had been here long before you and would be here long after. Nora had been in the high country for 3 months. She knew December now, or she thought she did. She was wrong. The cold that came in the 2nd week of December was not the cold she had prepared for. It was not the cold she had patched the coat against, or resoled the boots against, or wound the extra wool blanket around her shoulders against at 4 in the morning. This cold was different. This was the cold of a mountain winter that has decided it is done being reasonable. 20 below, before sunrise. Ice on the inside of the barn walls by the time she reached them, the water lines. The ones that ran from the creek feed down to the near barn, the system she had cleaned and rejointed in October, frozen solid at 3 points before she found the first break. And the cattle, 31 animals that needed water, every single morning, every single day. In temperatures that froze a bucket solid in 40 minutes if you left it standing. So there was no question of weather. There was only the question of how fast. She learned the winter the way she had learned everything else at Ironwood, by doing it, and noting what failed, and not doing that again. The creek feed lines, needed wrapping where they ran above ground. She used sacking and what she could salvage from the old horse blankets, doubling it on the north-facing sections that got no sun. The near barn had a heating issue she solved with an extra lantern mounted on a bracket she built herself carefully. Because a lantern in a barn full of hay is a thing you do not get casual about. You do not get casual about it even when you are very cold. Especially then. The cattle needed extra feed. The grass was under 8 inches of snow. The hay was going fast, too fast. She mentioned it at supper one evening, in the second week of December. At this rate, she said, "We'll be short by February." Edmund said nothing for a moment. Then, "I know, Ridgway. I'll go in the next clear window. Before Christmas if I can." "I can go." Edmund looked at her. "It's a hard ride in this weather," he said. "I know what a hard ride is." A pause. "I'll go," Edmund said. "I know the merchant." Nora looked at her plate. Looked up. "Then I'll hold the ranch while you're gone." Edmund said nothing, which was, she had learned, Edmund's version of yes. He left on a Thursday when the sky was clear and the temperature had climbed to 10 above. He took the bay and the small wagon, and he left before 5 because the road into Ridgway was 20 miles and he wanted to be back before dark. Winifred watched him go from the kitchen window. Nora stood in the yard and watched until the wagon was over the rise. Then she turned back to the work, because the work did not pause for Edmund being gone. The cattle needed water. The hay needed hauling from the far side of the barn where the better quality bales were stacked. The east water line had developed a slow seep at the second joint. She'd found it 2 days ago and patched it, but the patch needed checking in this temperature. She checked it. She hauled the hay. She watered the cattle. She did all of this in temperatures that made the air feel like something solid, something you had to push through, something that pressed back. Gout worked beside her, left flank, always the left, his breath coming in small bursts, his paws on the frozen ground sounding like small stones. He did not slow down. He did not complain. He was a border collie. And this was the work, and as far as he was concerned, the cold was simply a condition of the work. And conditions were not things you argued with. Nora agreed with him entirely. Winifred brought lunch out to her. This was new. For 3 months, lunch had been whatever Nora grabbed from the kitchen on her way through, eaten standing or walking or perched on a fence rail with one eye on the herd. She had never thought to ask for anything different. It had not occurred to her that different was an option. But Winifred came out at midday with a covered pot and 2 tin cups of coffee, and she sat on the overturned water barrel near the south barn door, and she did not say anything about the fact that this was not a thing she normally did. She just sat and poured and handed 1 cup to Nora. They sat in the cold and drank coffee and looked at the south pasture, where the fence line was invisible under the snow except for the tops of the posts. "He'll be back by dark," Winifred said. "I know. He worries about the bay on the ice. The bay is sure-footed. I checked his shoes last week." Winifred looked at her. "Did you tell Edmund that?" "No. Why not?" Nora thought about it. "Because he already knew. He checked them himself the night before." Winifred nodded, drank her coffee. "He doesn't always need to be told that you know things," she said. "Sometimes it's enough that you know them." Nora looked at the fence posts. "That's not how I grew up," she said. "No," Winifred said. "I don't imagine it is." A pause. The wind came off the mountain and moved through the yard and went on. Scout appeared from around the corner of the barn, did a quick visual survey of the situation. 2 humans sitting, no cattle emergency. Coughed Pressfawn and settled himself between them with the air of a dog who has determined that this is where the warmth is. "Thomas used to bring coffee out to Edmund in the winter," Winifred said. "When he was working the far barn," she said it simply, not with grief exactly. With the particular quality of someone who has found a way to carry a memory that doesn't make them drop everything else. Edmund pretended he didn't notice. But he always did. Nora held her cup in both hands, the warmth of it against her palms. "I notice things," she said. I just don't always know what to do with them." "You don't have to do anything with them," Winifred said. "Sometimes noticing is enough." Edmund came back before dark, 2 hours before dark, actually. He came over the rise with the wagon heavier than when he left. Feed, good quality. She could see it from the yard, he also. And this she noticed immediately because she noticed things. Had a brown paper parcel on the seat beside him, medium-sized, tied with string. He did not mention the parcel. He unhitched the bay and checked his feet. She watched him do it from across the yard, noted the thoroughness of it, noted that he checked every shoe twice, and then he led the bay into the near stall and got him settled, came out. Saw Nora watching. "Feed's in the wagon," he said. "I'll unload it in the morning." "It's too cold to stand around stacking." She opened her mouth. "In the morning," he said again, without heat. Just a fact. She closed her mouth. He went into the house. The parcel went with him. She did not ask about the parcel, but at supper that evening, Winifred set a new pair of gloves beside Nora's plate. Heavy leather, double-lined. The kind made for serious winter work, not for looking at. Nora looked at the gloves. Looked at Edmund. Edmund was eating his supper and looking at his plate with the complete attention of a man who has no idea what you might be referring to. "Thank you," Nora said. "Ridgway had good stock this year," he said, to his plate. Merchant had extra. Winifred refilled his coffee without a word. Nora put the gloves on. They fit. Which meant someone had been paying attention to the size of her hands. She ate the rest of her supper and did not say anything else about it. But, later, in the room at the back of the barn, she wrote in the notebook, "December, Ridgway, gloves." And then she sat with the pencil for a moment before she wrote one more word, "home." She looked at it. Then she closed the notebook and put it under the mattress and lay back and stared at the ceiling. Home. She had not written that word in 3 years. She wasn't entirely sure what to do with it now. Christmas passed quietly. Winifred made a spiced cake from a recipe, she said, had come from her mother, who had brought it from Pennsylvania in a wagon in 1840-something, which made the recipe older than Colorado itself. Edmund brought in a small pine and set it in the corner and did not decorate it, which Winifred found unacceptable, which led to a 20-minute negotiation conducted entirely in expressions and small sounds that resulted in the pine wearing 3 dried orange slices and a length of red raw cloth, and Edmund sitting back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who has accepted defeat with dignity. Nora watched this. She did not laugh, but the thing in her chest that had been held fairly tight for 3 years loosened slightly. Just slightly. Just enough. After supper, Edmund poured 3 glasses of the good whiskey. He did it, without ceremony, just took the bottle down and poured and set the glasses on the table, and that was that. They sat by the fire, and the pine, with its 3 orange slices, stood in the corner, being undecorated in a very festive way. And Scout occupied the best position near the hearth, and was entirely unashamed about it. No one said much. They didn't need to. And then January happened, 3 weeks of cold that was a different category of cold entirely from December. The kind of cold that cracks stone, that splits wood down the grain, that gets into the water lines, even when you've wrapped them, and still finds the weak point and breaks through. 2 lines went in one night. One of them fed the cattle. Nora found it at 4:15 in the morning, which was when she found everything, in the dark, in the cold, before anyone was awake, 'cause things that go wrong on a ranch tend to wait for the moment when you are most committed to sleep before they make their announcement. She did not wake Edmund. She found the break points. Improvised repairs from what was in the hardware bay. Not proper repairs, stopgap repairs, the kind you make at 4 in the morning and 20 below, when proper is not an option. She got water running to the cattle. It took 2 hours. By 6, she was back in the barn. Hands so cold she could not feel the middle 2 fingers of her left hand for a while. She stood at the lantern and held her hands near the heat until feeling came back. A process that was unpleasant in the specific way that returning blood circulation is always unpleasant. which is to say considerably. But the cattle had water. That was the thing. The cattle had water. Edmund found the repairs when he came out at 5:30. He stood and looked at them for a long time. Then he went in and had his coffee and came back out and looked at them again. Both lines, he said. The south one is a proper fix. The north one is temporary. It'll need to be redone properly when the temperature comes up. When did you find it? 4:15. He looked at her. You didn't wake me. You would have done the same thing I did. And there was no point in both of us being cold. Edmund looked at the repairs. Then he said, the temporary fix on the north line, is it the joint at the second post or the third? Third. Second is solid. Third had a hairline I missed in October. He nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He said, good work, 2 words, from Edmund Holt. In January at 5:30 in the morning and 20 below, those 2 words were. She understood this now, approximately equivalent to a speech. She went in for breakfast. Then came the day she fell. She had not been sleeping well. Not because the room was uncomfortable. She had stopped noticing the thin mattress sometime in November and had started thinking of the room at the back of the barn as simply the place where she slept, which was its own form of comfort. Not because of noise or cold or worry. Because she had been running for 3 years on the energy that comes from not having a place to stop, and now she had stopped, and her body was catching up. She was tired, not dramatically tired, not the kind of tired that announces itself, just the slow, cumulative exhaustion that builds in layers when you have been doing everything that needs doing for 3 months without a day that wasn't full. She knew she was tired. She was not as careful as she should have been. It was a Thursday afternoon, mid-January. She was hauling water from the auxiliary tank to the far stall, a distance of about 40 yards, 2 heavy buckets. Ground that had been frozen and thawed and frozen again, until it was a particular combination of ice and mud that was treacherous in the specific way of something that looks like it will hold and doesn't. She knew it was treacherous. She had noted it that morning. She stepped wrong anyway. Her right boot hit the ice patch at the wrong angle. Her weight, all of it, all of her, shifted before she could correct. The buckets went one way, and she went another, and then she was on the ground with the specific suddenness of a fall that gives you no warning and no time to prepare. Her left knee hit hardest. She lay there for a moment, the cold ground against her side, the sky above her, the water spreading out from the tipped buckets, already starting to freeze at the edges. She did a quick internal inventory. Knee, painful but functional. Wrist, jarred but not broken. Pride. Complicated. She moved to get up, and found that getting up, right now, from this position on this ground, was going to take more than she currently had in her. This was not a thought she was accustomed to having. She was Nora Briggs. She got up. That was what she did. You got knocked down. By weather. By bad luck. By people who looked at you and decided before they knew, and you got up and you kept going. Except, right now her left knee was not cooperating, and the ground was ice. And she had been awake since before 4, and the accumulated weight of 3 months of hard winter was sitting on her chest like a very large, very patient stone. So she lay there, just for a moment. She was not going to think of it as anything other than a tactical pause, a brief reassessment of the situation, a moment in which she was determining the most efficient method of returning to vertical. That was all. She was absolutely not lying in the frozen mud of an ironwood ranch yard in the middle of January, unable to get up. Except she was. Edmund found her 15 minutes later. He had come around the far corner of the barn with the intention of checking the north waterline repair, and there she was. On the ground. The buckets tipped, the water frozen at the edges. He crossed the yard, did not run, did not shout, did not do any of the things that a person does when they see something that frightens them and want to cover the fact that it frightens them with noise and movement. He just walked across the yard and crouched down beside her. How bad? He said. Knee, she said. I stepped wrong. I'm fine. Which? Knee left. He looked at her left leg. Then he put one hand on her arm, solid and steadying, and the other under her shoulder, and he helped her up, not making it more than it was, not making it less, just helping, the same way he handed her the gate chain on the first day. No explanation needed. Here, take it. She got upright, put weight on the left knee, but stable. She reached for the nearer bucket. Leave it, Edmund said. The cattle. I'll do it, Edmund, I'll do it. He picked up both buckets, walked to the auxiliary tank, filled them, carried them to the far stall. She stood in the yard and watched him do this, and felt something that she was not entirely sure how to name. Not embarrassment. She had done too much on her own for too long to be embarrassed by needing help once. Not gratitude exactly, though it was close. Something that lived near gratitude, but had a different quality. Something that had to do with the specific experience of being helped by someone who was not making you small by helping you, who was just helping, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Edmund came back, looked at her standing in the yard. Can you walk on it? Yes, go in, I'll finish out here. She opened her mouth. He looked at her with the patient, immovable expression of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in debating it. She went in. Winifred had a pot of something on the stove. She looked at Nora when she came in. Looked at the knee. Looked at Nora's face, said nothing, set a cup of coffee on the table, set a clean cloth in a basin of water that was warmer than cold and cooler than hot, set both within reach, then went back to the stove. Nora sat at the table. She looked at the coffee, at the cloth, at the window with the blue glass bottle on the sill, and sat with the strange, uncomfortable, slightly bewildering feeling of being taken care of. Not managed, not handled. Not managed in the way of people who take care of you because it makes them feel better about themselves, or because they are adding to a ledger they will collect on later. Just taken care of. The way you do it when you actually mean it. She picked up the cloth, pressed it to her knee, drank the coffee, and outside Edmund finished the afternoon's work without making it a thing. Edmund came in at dark, washed his hands at the basin, sat down. They ate supper. No one mentioned the fall. No one mentioned the buckets or the ice patch or the 15 minutes in the yard or the fact that Nora's left knee was stiff and she was sitting slightly tilted to compensate for it. No one mentioned any of it. And that was the kindest thing. That was the thing that undid something in her chest that had been knotted for a very long time. Not the help, not the coffee, not the cloth, the not mentioning. The treating it as a normal part of a normal day, because falls happen. Because cold happens, and ice happens, and tired happens, and bodies are not machines, and ranches are hard. And none of that was shameful or surprising or worth cataloging. It was just what happened. And then you had supper. Nora ate her supper and did not say anything. But when she stood to clear her plate, she stood on both feet evenly, and did not compensate for the knee, and Edmund did not look at her to see if she was managing. Because he already knew she was managing. That was how respect moved between them. Quietly, through what was observed without needing to be said, she was out in the yard before Edmund the next morning. It was 5 o'clock, still dark. The knee was stiff but functional. She had tested it before she got out of bed and arrived at the same conclusion she'd arrived at the night before. Not broken. Just inconvenient. She had the cattle's first water done by the time Edmund came out. He stopped on the porch steps, looked at her in the yard, looked at the cattle at the trough, looked at her again. Said nothing, went back inside, came back out with his coffee, started the day. Scout ran the east perimeter with great self-importance, and then returned to report that everything was in order, which everyone already knew. But it was his job to report it, and he was going to do his job. The sun came up over the eastern peathy snow on the Tanai high country pink, and then gold, and then white. The creek, somewhere under its ice, was moving. January was halfway done. Reeve came back on a Tuesday, the 14th of January, 1880, which Nora would remember specifically because she had written it in the notebook morning along with the temperature. 12 above, the warmest it had been in 2 weeks, and the note about the North Waterline repair holding overnight. She saw the horse before she heard it this time, a single rider coming up the road from the south. A different horse than the bay Reeve usually rode, a gray. And beside the rider, not another gun-wearing companion, but a man in a dark coat with a leather satchel across his body. A lawyer, the satchel was the sign. People who carried satchels like that in this country were carrying papers, important papers. The kind of papers that people like Reeve used when the conversation had moved from suggestion to pressure. She stood at the fence and watched them come. Then she went to get Edmund. She did not have to explain. Edmund looked at the rider and the man with the satchel coming up the road, and his jaw set in the particular way it set when he had been waiting for something, and it had arrived. He reached for the rifle. "Not yet," Nora said. He looked at her. "Let me talk first." A long pause. She held his gaze. Edmund set the rifle against the wall. Just against the wall. Not down. Available. And then he stood at the barn door with his hands at his sides and watched Nora walk to the gate. Winifred was on the porch, arms folded. The expression of a woman who has been married to this land and this man for 31 years and is not going to be moved from it by lawyers or papers or men who come in January thinking that cold and desperation are on their side. Scout sat at her feet, also with the expression of someone who was not going to be moved. Nora reached the gate. Opened it. Stood in it. Reeve dismounted. He was more careful this time, more formal. The previous visit in November, the horses and the darkness and the two men who wore their guns low. That had been a different kind of approach. That had been the approach that says, "We can make this difficult." This was a different approach. This was the approach that says, "I can make this legal." Which was in some ways harder to answer, Miss Briggs, Reeve said. He remembered her name. She noted that. "I'd like to speak with Edmund Holt." "You can speak with me," she said. "I'm the managing partner of Ironwood Ranch." Reeve blinked. The lawyer with the satchel made a small sound. Not quite a reaction. More like the reflexive notation of someone who catalogs information for a living. "Managing partner," Reeve said. "Ironwood Ranch is a registered partnership operation," Nora said. "Holt and Briggs. Filed with the county clerk in Hinsdale in November." She said it the way she said everything. Plain, without performance. "Any proposal regarding the sale or transfer of any portion of this property needs to be submitted in writing to our attorney in Durango." A silence. Reeve looked at her. She did not look away. "I see," he said. "I can give you the attorney's name and address if you'd like to write it down," she said. "I have paper." The lawyer with the satchel made another sound. This one had something in it that might have been, in different circumstances, a suppressed laugh. Reeve looked past her, at Edmund standing at the barn door, at Winifred on the porch, at the ranch in the winter morning light, the repaired fence, the solid water trough, the barn with its fixed roof, the 31 cattle, visible in the east field, moving through the snow, with the unhurried certainty of animals that are well fed and well managed, and not planning to go anywhere, at a place that was not failing, at a place that, contrary to his calculations, was holding. He looked at Nora. Something shifted in his expression, not defeat, not exactly. More the recalibration of a man who has built his approach around patience and the inevitable decline of things, encountering something that has declined to decline. "Holt and Briggs," he said. "That's right." He remounted. Looked at her one more time from the saddle. "And then something happened that she had not anticipated," he said. "You're good at this. Not warm. Not friendly. Not a compliment in any conventional sense. Just the observation of a man who deals in property and has learned, over a long career, to accurately assess what he is looking at." "I know," Nora said. Reeve turned the gray horse. The lawyer remounted. They rode south. She stood at the gate and watched them go, down the road, over the rise. until the sound of hoofbeats was swallowed by the quiet of January, and the only thing she could hear was the wind and the creek under its ice. She closed the gate. Scout was already moving toward the barn, ready for the next thing, the way he always was. She walked back across the yard. Edmund was still at the barn door. She stopped in front of him. "He won't come back," she said. Edmund looked at the road where the dust had already settled, looked at the ranch around them, looked at her. "No," he said. "I don't think he will." A pause. "Holt and Briggs," he said. "That's what it says on the paperwork. I know what it says on the paperwork." "I signed the paperwork." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "How does it sound to you?" She considered this. "Like something that was supposed to be there," she said. Edmund made the sound. The low, chest-deep sound she had learned to recognize as his version of something he could not quite put into words and was not going to try. He went back into the barn. She went back to work. February came warmer than January. Not warm. No one was going to call February in the Colorado high country warm, but the particular relative warmth of a season that has made its point and is beginning, slightly, to reconsider. The water lines held. The cattle were healthy. All 31, the hay was going to last. Edmund had calculated it 3 times, and Nora had calculated it twice, and they had arrived at the same number by different routes, which was the mathematical confirmation that they were both right. The roof held, the trough held, the fence held. Ironwood Ranch held. On the 1st of February, Winifred made a cake. Edmund looked at the cake. "It's not Christmas," he said. "No," Winifred said. "It's not anyone's birthday." "No, then what?" "Thomas would have been 24 today," Winifred said. Edmund was quiet. He sat down at the table, looked at the cake, looked at his hands. Nora sat across from him. She did not say anything. She did not fill the silence with something useful or practical or redirecting. She just sat with him in it. The way you sit with someone in a grief that has learned to share the house with other things but hasn't gone anywhere. Hasn't been asked to. After a while, Edmund said, "He would have liked you." Nora looked up. "He would have found you funny," Edmund said. He had a sense for that. He liked people who said exactly what they meant without making a production of it. He was looking at the table. He would have been competitive about the cattle. He would have argued with you about the roan. "I would have won the argument," Nora said. Edmund made the sound. "Probably." He looked at his hands. "He would have argued anyway." "Good," she said. Edmund looked up. "Good arguments make better decisions," she said. "If you're always agreeing with everyone, you end up with bad fences." Edmund was quiet. Then he said, "That is the most Thomas thing anyone has said to me in 5 years." Nora did not know what to do with that, so she cut the cake. She put a large piece on Edmund's plate, and a large piece on Winifred's plate, and a large piece on her own plate. And nobody said anything about portions or propriety. And they ate the cake in the kitchen of Ironwood Ranch on the 1st of February 1880. And outside the creek was beginning, very slightly, to move under the ice. March, the ice cracked. Not all at once. Nothing in the mountains happens all at once. But one morning there was a sound from the creek, a low grinding sound like a door being opened that has been shut for a long time, and by afternoon, the water was running free at the edges. Just the edges, just the beginning. The bear snares along the tree line had been quiet since December. Whatever had been moving there had moved on, found other ground, or decided this particular fence line was no longer worth the trouble. Edmund pulled the snares in the first week of March without ceremony. Nora stood at the creek bank and listened to it. Scout stood beside her, ears forward, also listening. Running water, the most reassuring sound in the world to a person who spends a significant portion of every day ensuring that water goes where it is supposed to go. The snow on the south pasture began to go. Slowly, grudgingly, the way snow goes in March, when the sun is stronger than the cold for the first time in months. The grass underneath was pale, flattened, but it was there. Still there. The roan cow was the first one to the south fence line. Nora was watching from the east side when it happened. The gate opened, and the roan went through first, the way she always did, leading, and she walked to the south fence. The fence that Nora had rebuilt post by post in October, and she stood at it and looked at the pale grass beyond it, and then she began to eat. 31 cattle followed. The south pasture filled up. It was not a dramatic moment. There were no speeches, no ceremonies, no particular acknowledgement from the cattle that the fence was better than the one they had broken through 6 months ago. They just ate the grass that was there and went about their business, which was its own kind of acknowledgement, the kind that matters. April. The aspens came back. First as a kind of greenish haze along the edges of the stands, the soft, uncertain green of things that are deciding whether it is safe to commit. Then as actual leaves, small and new, and the particular bright green that only comes in the first weeks of April before the world adjusts to itself. The south pasture was thick, the east field was thick, the creek ran full. Nora walked the entire fence perimeter on a morning in the second week of April. Not because it needed immediate work. She had checked it 3 times over the winter, and it was solid. But because she walked it. Because she had been walking it since October, and it was part of the map inside her head now, the one she had been building since the first day. The internal geography of a place you know well enough to navigate in the dark. She knew Ironwood in the dark now. She knew where the ground dipped near the south corner post, where the creek bent before the east boundary, where the cattle preferred to stand in a west wind, where Scout always checked first when he was doing his own perimeter assessment, which was the southeast corner, which meant something had happened there once that she didn't know about, but that he had not forgotten. She knew this place, not the way you know a map, the way you know a person's habits. The creek in a particular floorboard, the silence before a storm. She stood at the southeast corner post at the end of her walk, looked back across the 400 acres, and felt something that she had not felt in 3 years and had not been sure she would ever feel again, and had stopped trying to find, because trying to find, it was the surest way to ensure it stayed hidden. She felt like she was looking at her own land. Not legally. Not yet. The partnership was 30%, not everything. And everything was a long way off and would be arrived at. Properly, the way things at Ironwood were always arrived at. But something in her chest said, this is yours. This is where you are. This is what it feels like to have stopped. She stood with it. Scout sat beside her and looked at the land with her, with the philosophical companionship of a dog who is not entirely sure what the human is feeling, but knows that standing here feels right and is prepared to stand here as long as needed. The fence rail. On a warm evening in the second week of April, warm enough that the sun was still above the peaks at 6:30, warm enough that the supper table had gone long and easy, and ended without anyone quite wanting to be the first to move. Nora went out to the south pasture fence. She climbed up, not easily. The fence rail was not designed for sitting, and she was not a small person, and the whole enterprise required a certain commitment. But she got up, both feet on the lower rail, both hands on the upper, and then a slightly undignified but ultimately successful transfer of weight that put her on top of the post with her legs. Over the south side, she sat and looked at the pasture in the evening light. The cattle moving through the new grass, the creek flashing where it bent, the aspens on the far edge of the east field throwing their new green against the blue of the sky. The fence line running straight in both directions, straight because she had walked it and worked it and knew every post of it. She heard Winifred's footsteps behind her, heard the particular quality of someone stopping to assess a situation, then heard the considerably more effortful sound of Winifred Holt. 61 years old, her knees having opinions about this, climbing up onto the fence rail beside her. It took a while. Nora did not offer but to help. She understood by now that some things needed to be accomplished without help. Winifred made it, sat beside her, got her breath. They looked at the pasture. You wrote a letter, Winifred said after a while. Not a question. She'd seen the envelope on the table last week. She was Winifred Holt. She noticed things, and she did not always say what she noticed, and sometimes she said it months later at 6:30 on a warm evening on a fence rail. "Yes," Nora said. "To whom?" A pause. "Someone in Laramie. We knew each other before." Nora looked at the cattle. "Before I was on the road. When I was still," she gestured vaguely, "at the road. At the distance behind her. Before? And I don't know." I wrote. "We'll see." Winifred looked at the pasture, at the fence line, at the water trough beside the near barn, rebuilt so solidly that it would outlast all of them. "When Edmund and I came here," she said, "we had nothing but 2 pairs of hands and a piece of paper that said we owned something we hadn't built yet. Most days that first year, I was certain we had made a terrible mistake." She paused. A cow moved through the herd below them. The roan, making her evening check of the perimeter the way she always did. "But you know what we had?" Winifred said. Nora looked at her. "Somewhere to stop," she said, "after a long time of not having it. Somewhere that was ours, that needed us, that we were responsible for." She looked at Nora. "That changes a person." Having somewhere to stop, Nora was quiet. The sun was dropping toward the peaks. Another hour, maybe less, before it was behind them and the evening went cool. "I think I stopped in September," Nora said, slowly, working it out as she said it. "When I walked up the road, I think I knew." She looked at the fence. "I just didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the part where it went wrong, where someone looked at me and decided something I couldn't argue with. And," Winifred said, "and it never came." She was quiet for a moment. "Edmund asked me if I could do the work. He didn't ask me anything else. He just watched me do the work, and then he watched Scout, and then he pointed at the barn. Edmund is like that, I know. I know that now." She looked at the pasture below them. "I've never been taken on my own terms before. Not from the first day." She paused. "I didn't know what to do with it for a long time, and now?" Nora thought about it, really thought about it. The way she thought about fence posts and water joints. Not rushing to an answer, but taking it apart and looking at each piece until she understood the whole of it. "Now I know what to do with it," she said. "Now I just do the work. And the work is good. And at 6 o'clock we have supper. And Scout runs the perimeter whether or not the perimeter needs running. And the cattle are where they're supposed to be." She looked at her hands. "The gloves from Ridgeway, worn soft now, with 4 months of use. And I have a place to send and receive mail." Winifred smiled. Not a small smile, a real one. The kind that happens when something you have hoped for arrives, finally in the shape you hoped it would. "That's all you need," she said, "to begin." Below them, Scout appeared from around the corner of the near barn and made his assessment of the situation. 2 humans on the fence rail, pasture accounted for, herd present, no emergency, and sat down directly below Winifred with the calm authority of a dog who has decided that his place is here and is not confused about it. The last of the sun caught the peaks, turned them gold, and then pink. And then the particular blue-white of mountain evenings that is not quite dark and not quite light and holds everything in between. Edmund came out onto the porch at 7. He had the mending Winifred had left on the chair. He was holding it without any intention of actually doing anything with it. The holding was just something for his hands to do, while he stood and looked at the pasture and the 2 women on the fence rail, and the dog below them, and the last of the April evening going quiet over the mountains. He stood there for a while. Then he went back inside. Came back with the good whiskey and 3 glasses. Set them on the porch railing without a word. Winifred heard the clink of glass from 30 yards. She climbed down from the fence rail with the dignity of a woman who is doing exactly what she intends to do, regardless of what her knees think about it. Nora climbed down after her. They crossed the yard. Edmund poured. No ceremony, no speech. They stood on the porch and drank, to nothing in particular, to everything. The creek ran. The cattle grazed in the last of the light. Scout made his final round. Then Edmund went inside. Winifred followed, and for a while Nora did not move from the porch. the good whiskey still warm in her chest, the April dark coming down slow off the peaks, the mountains holding the last of the light the way they always did, without asking permission, without explaining themselves. She looked at the fence line she had walked in October with frozen hands, and a plan she hadn't fully believed in yet. At the water trough, she had rebuilt stone by stone. At the barn roof, she had set right so it would hold through one more winter and the winter after that. 400 acres, 31 cattle, one very opinionated border collie, and a room at the back of the barn that she had stopped thinking of as the room at the back of the barn and started thinking of as simply where she slept. The heaviest thing she had carried for 3 years was not what people assumed it was. It was not her body. It was not the size of her. People had spent years trying to make her ashamed of that, and she had spent 6 months at the age of 10 deciding they were wrong, and she had not revisited the question since. The heaviest thing was not having a place. Moving through a world that kept deciding things about you before it knew you. Being the person who walks up the road with everything against her and asks anyway. She had set it down in September. She just hadn't known that yet. You don't always know the moment that drifting ends. Sometimes you only know it looking back. But when you know it all the way. She went inside. The light in the kitchen window stayed on a while longer, then it went out too, and Ironwood Ranch held its ground in the dark the way it always had. Not because nothing had pressed on it, but because the people inside it had decided, each in their own time, that it was worth holding.